So first, thank you all for taking the time out of your day to spend a few minutes with us. I do want to say really a heartfelt thank you to begin to all the county employees, to Cal OES, our first responders, and really everybody that is working tirelessly through these events, not only our Public Safety Power Shutoff events, but also the fires that are occurring throughout California right now. We're always humbled and impressed by the county family in times of crisis, and really proud to represent you here in Sacramento. So thank you so much for all of your work. We are going to be switching gears slightly today. Initially, we had scheduled this webinar prior to the events of the past week and a half plus. So we know there are a lot of folks that have been pulled away that are actually actively working on PSPS events or activated within your EOCs. So we are going to be talking specifically today about the funding that is available through the state for local government, specifically on public safety power shutoff events, and we'll be able to answer hopefully some of your questions about that today. So first, let me introduce myself. My name is Cara Martinson. I'm a senior legislative representative with the California State Association of Counties, also our federal affairs manager. I'm joined today by my colleague Josh Gauger, who is a legislative representative for government, finance, operation, and budget issues, and I'll be turning the presentation over to him in just a moment. Also on the line, we have Lori Nezhura, who is the Legislative Coordination Manager for the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, and she is joined by her colleague Gina Buccieri Harrington, who is also with Cal OES, and we will end with their comments today, and they are also on the line to answer some of your questions. If you do have questions that aren't answered, please feel free to share them with us. Our email is included in the PowerPoint slide, and it's also available on the CSAC website, and we will try and get back to you as soon as possible. So just a little bit of background on CSAC's advocacy efforts and really the funding that came available recently. Throughout the year, our work, not only through the budget process, but also through our negotiations on SB 901 and AB 1054, the wildfire bills, we knew that the occurrence of public safety power shutoffs would be happening on a more frequent basis moving forward. And with that comes a lot of coordination, planning, and costs associated. And so we've been advocating within the legislature and through that budget process throughout the year for funds directed specifically to you at the local level to help manage your costs related to these IOU initiated events. $75 million was included in the 2019-20 budget as one-time funding specifically for these events, and there was language in there that it directed it sort of at a broad array of activities, both at the state and the local level. And I'd just like to say too at the outset, we understand that the portion available specifically to counties is just a start. From our perspective at CSAC, we're grateful to the governor's office for appropriating these funds in a timely manner, but understand all of you out there that are dealing with this on the ground have significant costs that have come about from these most recent events, and there will be more moving forward. So we'll talk about really documenting those and our next steps towards the end of the slide. So as you all know, 75 million was the total number, but that was broken down between a number of different entities, including the state of California, which received roughly about half the funds for their own needs, continuity of operations, their infrastructure, and the remainder is directed at local governments. And we're very thankful that the majority of that half is directed specifically towards counties, 26 million in particular, and we'll go to the breakdown of that in just a minute. Cities, I will note, have a slightly different process, 10 million to them, but 4 of the major cities are appropriated $500,000 each, and the remainder of those funds are through a competitive grant process. And then the remainder, 1.5 million, goes to tribes for their activities. So as you all probably are aware, the funding breakdown for the $26 million appropriated to county government includes a base level amount, $150,000 base grant to all counties across California, which is a very positive step in the right direction in our opinion. Counties less than 50,000 population remain at that base of 150,000. Counties more than 50,000 in population that have experienced a PSPS have a base of 150, and then more than 50,000 that have experienced a PSPS have that base of 350,000. And then on top of that, there's per capita funding in addition to that base amount in the amount of $10.3 million. And that funding chart was sent to our list and it's been made available, and you should have received documentation already from OES, but if you have specific questions about what is due to your county, please feel free to chime in. We have that with us too. So there are a few conditions applied to the funds that are directed towards county government. It is a direct appropriation, so there's no grant application that has to be filled out, but a few of the conditions that apply are related to collaboration with cities within your jurisdiction. Coordination should support critical infrastructure county-wide, focusing on populations that need the most assistance. This condition is not explicitly defined, we'll note, but a description of how this coordination occurred and really how you accomplish this goal will be required in your reporting back to OES, so that's something to keep in mind. And then several of the other conditions are, just general and typical state requirements, procurement standards, PRA standards for contracts, etc. Your letters from OES should have these conditions spelled out in greater detail. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague Josh to talk about eligible uses of those funds.
Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, so we just wanted to spend a little bit of time walking through some of the eligible uses of the funds, and ahead of time just wanted to also mention that you should be receiving a letter from Cal OES that lays some of this out as well, so you'll have that information in front of you. But again, feel free to ask questions and we can try to talk through some of those specific or unique circumstances. As it shows on the slide, some of the eligible uses of the funds include equipment such as generators, fuel storage, or other backup energy sources for essential facilities such as fire stations, community centers, health facilities, these that are critical to communities' function during these interruptions. Also eligible are one-time costs associated with identifying and equipping resource centers for the public to access during electrical disruptions. We know in some cases that the IOUs have set up resource centers, but certainly counties and local governments are assisting with those efforts. Also, backup emergency communications equipment such as battery-powered radios would be an eligible use. Public education materials or supplies focused on individual or family preparedness for electrical disruptions. Development and update of contingency plans for electrical disruptions that include considerations such as protecting individuals with access and functional needs, medical baseline, and socially vulnerable populations. Also, emergency public information and preservation of essential functions. Additionally, development and update of government continuity of operation plans would be an eligible use of the funds. Risk assessments for critical infrastructure and lifelines, as well as post-event reports that identify lessons learned to inform continual improvements. So to kind of sum it up, it would be various equipment needs, preparation and planning, communication needs, and anything that goes along with planning or lessons learned for future improvements to public safety power shutoffs. Also, you receive a little bit of information about what is not an eligible expenditure for the funding that comes directly to counties, and that includes response costs associated with electric disruption events, including emergency operations center staffing, security, law and fire response, or other overtime charges. However, we did want to note that the latest declaration of emergency is a statewide declaration of emergency, and included in that proclamation is reference to fires, weather conditions, red flag warnings, and PSPS events. So while some costs may not be eligible for the $26 million that we're talking about here today that goes directly to counties, it's still important to track your overall costs in responding to these emergency events, and can you continue to work with your state partners at Cal OES to see whether or not there's reimbursability given the state of emergency. Also wanted to make it clear that it's important to consider the implications of declaring a local emergency in response to some of these events within 10 days of the event, as that could have certain implications. So that's something you also may want to consider. Just want to spend a few moments also on the process. So county OES managers will receive a letter from Cal OES, as I indicated earlier, that will have some of this information in it, as well as their allocation and the general requirements that go along with receiving and utilizing the funds. Counties must provide 2 reports on the expenditure of the funds. The first report due November 30th, 2020, and the second November 30th, 2022. These reports shall identify how the funds have been used, including a description of each project or activity undertaken, each local entity that undertook the project or activity, the amount of funding provided to the project or activity, specific outcomes achieved, whether the project or activity was completed, and whether it was used during PSPS events. So that is kind of the end of the structured portion of the presentation. We did want to turn it over to Lori Nezhura from Cal OES to just give you an opportunity to chime in or provide any updates that you may have.
Thank you all. I want to say to those of you on the line, this is Lori Nezhura from Cal OES. I'm in the Legislative and External Affairs Office. Your staff in Sacramento has been absolutely wonderful throughout this PSPS event, helping us to get information to you, and in turn funneling information from you to the State Operations Center. So we just want you to know how much we appreciate them. I also wanted to maybe lead off with something, some good news. Some of you have asked when and how the allocations will reach you. The answer is you will be getting a check today by FedEx. So those should come this afternoon. Any more specific information with regard to who is getting the check, we will have to answer on a case by or one-on-one basis offline. I have Gina Bussieri-Harrington here with me today. She is the Assistant Director of Grants Management, whose division is handling the administration of this grant. And also I have to say that they got a lot of work done in a very short amount of time to get the grant information out to you. And so we're very appreciative of her and her staff's efforts. As Cara and Josh said, we are happy to answer any questions. There may be some that we don't have the answer to today, but we will continue to research and find that information for you. So if you can provide them in writing to Cara or Josh, I'll let you tell folks who to send it to. We will be happy to get back to you with any questions we can't answer today.
Great, thank you so much, Lori. So now we'll transition over to the Q&A period. And again, if you do have a question, please type it into the question feature on the webinar, and we will do our best to field those. But again, we will be taking note of these. And as Lori mentioned, please feel free to contact us offline if you have specific questions that we can't answer now or that need additional follow-up. So the first question is, our county is considering generators for social services facilities so that benefit issuance is not interrupted in the event of a PSPS. Is this an allowable use for the funding? And Lori, feel free to chime in as well, but generators and infrastructure really are one of, I think, the key priority areas in addition to planning that these funds are dedicated to. So that is a allowable use. And I will note too that since the grant fundings really direct counties to coordinate with jurisdictions within their city, backup infrastructure for social services or for other departments that really reach a wider net of folks beyond the unincorporated area is really a focus for these funds. Lori, is there anything you wanted to add?
No, you really hit it. That is an eligible use, and the letter that you received, the allocation letter, has the eligible uses categorically, and that is one of them. Really, we didn't want to send you an exhaustive list of eligible uses because we don't want to restrict your creativity in your efforts to mitigate and prepare for PSPS events. That said, we did, I think, explicitly identify ineligible uses. So obviously staying away from those.
Okay, thank you, Lori. So the next question is, can the funds be applied retroactively to eligible PSPS planning activities that were performed earlier this fiscal year? And what about generators bought just before the first event? I believe, based on some of the information we have, that would be eligible as well. So it's I think for the most recent PSPS events, and covers like the period of performance, if you will, would be July 1, 2019 through the kind of reporting period, October 31st, 2022. So Lori, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that this funding is intended to cover all of the PSPS events that have occurred to date, not just events going forward.
So that is my understanding as well, and we will go back and double check that.
Yeah, and I think the letter and some of the information you'll receive will indicate that all activities must be completed within the period of performance, and I think it'll also define period of performance beginning July 1st, so that I think should help as well.
Our next question, does the governor's proclamation that addresses PSPS authorize reimbursement to local government under CDAA, or is it just allowing state resources to assist local government in response? We don't have a definitive answer for that. We will be working with the governor's office and Cal OES, but the statewide proclamation does cover PSPS, and traditionally that is the trigger for local reimbursement if you declare a local state of emergency. So as Josh mentioned, we would, if folks have taken those steps, we would encourage you to document those costs. CSAC is also asking for those costs, so we have a better idea of what the cost impact to local governments is from these events, but just traditionally how the act works, if it is a statewide proclamation for a covered event and locals also declare a local state of emergency, there is potential for reimbursement under CDAA.
Right, and yeah, just I think you covered it there. Just to kind of supplement, we're just encouraging you to track those costs and work with OES, as this is clearly a new process that is kind of being defined, and there's, I think also, I'll just put a plug in that there's a lot that goes into the actual reimbursement process and Cal OES's analysis and the state administration. But yeah, we are encouraging to track those costs and work with our partners at the state level to see whether or not they'd be reimbursable under CDAA. So the next question is, are cities applying to the counties for funding? So the kind of, as Cara outlined, the funding is broken out into multiple components. There was $26 million directly to the counties and then $10 million to cities. So there are some cities that will receive funding directly from the state, but I believe theirs is more of a kind of RFP or application process. So the requirements will also, of the county funding, will require you to coordinate locally with all of your cities but there is not a defined, as part of the agreement, part of the letter, not a defined process for cities to apply to counties for funding, but we know that there there's certainly widespread implications to the PSPS events, and some of that coordination and decisions will probably occur locally on how best to utilize those funds.
And I'll just add, for the city bucket of funding, when they do, that is the grant funding, when they do put in RFPs, that will be to the state and not to the county for those funds. The $26 million is directly allocated to county government based on the formula that we outlined. Our next question is, when can we expect the letter of guidance from Cal OES to arrive? Well, as Lori mentioned, the good news is the check is in the mail, quite literally. So you should be receiving that today. It's our understanding that the Cal OES letters went out last week, and I believe they were directed towards emergency managers, but Lori, I'll let you jump in if I stand corrected.
Regarding the letters, yes, the checks are coming today. I'm waiting to see Gina's text to know if the letters have already been sent out. The letters, all the counties need to do when they receive their allocation letter is to sign it and return it to Cal OES. There's no application for the counties. That, in essence, will be your application.
Right, so you probably locally want to just make sure you're in close contact with your county OES manager to stay in touch on whether or not that letter's arrived, and kind of look at some of the technical details of the letter. And
in the meantime, Gina has texted me that the letters were emailed last Friday night and hard copies were put in the mail. So the emergency management offices do have the letter in their possession.
Our next question: are funds available to the public to purchase generators? These funds that are allocated, the $75 million in total and $26 million to counties, are specific to local government. We went and ran through the eligible uses are meant for county infrastructure, for planning purposes, and not a direct allocation to the public in general.
Next question is, how can counties find their per capita allocation? So when that letter has arrived, in coordination with your county OES manager, it will be clearly articulated in the letter the exact dollar amount that each county is receiving, and kind of the per capita calculation that Cara mentioned is just kind of a subcomponent of the overall calculation. There are multiple components that included a minimum for each county, kind of regardless of population, and then if a county was over 50,000 population and has experienced a PSPS event, the minimum would be 350,000, and then kind of after setting those base minimums for each kind of type of county in that case, the remaining funds would be allocated on a per capita basis. So that's all factored into the total dollar amount that you'll see in your letter.
CSAC also sent out the allocation chart last week to county supervisors, ledge coordinators, CAOs. So feel free to drop me an email if you'd like that chart to see all California counties and their allocation. Happy to share that with everybody.
Let's see. Next question is, Lake County had formed a risk reduction authority. Are they eligible to receive funds? That's probably a question best kind of more further defined, and kind of we can follow up via email if you want to email that question to Cara or myself, and we can kind of work with you directly on what exactly the responsibilities and roles of the risk reduction authority are and how they fit into this pot of funding and the requirements.
Our next question is, will the state be building capacity or the capability, to respond to local jurisdictions with mobile generators? Again, that's probably a question that we need to follow up on. The state did receive half of the $75 million for their own specific needs and infrastructure, but our conversations about ongoing needs and funding are all part of this process. So we don't know specifically if any of their funds will be dedicated to additional resources to in turn help us, but we're making sure that the state understands really what our true costs and resource needs are. So we can follow up on that for sure.
Right. Next question, does a county need to declare a local emergency to be eligible for the funds? So I think that we should probably break that question into two components. For this funding that is the main point of conversation in this webinar, the $26 million will come directly to the county and does not require a declaration of a local emergency. I think the reference we made earlier to the declaration of a local emergency is just to take that into consideration during PSPS events and the kind of relationship that a local declaration of a local emergency may have with CDAA reimbursement and state declarations of emergencies, but we do not believe that declaring a local emergency is a prerequisite to receiving this pot of funding that we're discussing.
Our next question, will CSAC play a role in encouraging the governor and the state legislature to put more pressure on the IOUs to increase assistance to county governments during a PSPS event? And the short answer to that is yes. We are in the process of working with all of you to document your costs. Obviously, we understand those are ongoing. We originally sent out a survey asking for those costs by the end of the week, but feel free to take your time needed to document everything as we're still in the midst of these events. But the purpose of that survey and documenting these costs is to really demonstrate the need at the local level, not only to the state for additional resources to us, but also to the investor-owned utilities there that are initiating these events, and so that we can better coordinate on the amount of resource centers that are needed and additional funding that perhaps should be provided by the state, by IOUs, or by additional funding to local governments.
So the next question is, for cities planning to apply for funding, are there application forms and guidance developed? Is there a deadline for application submission for cities? So I think we've touched on it a little bit, that the $26 million that we're discussing that goes to counties doesn't have a set application requirement for cities to adhere to, but for the funding that is separate from the $26 million that the state has earmarked for cities, I believe that there is a separate application process that the cities will be working with Cal OES to go through to access that $10 million.
Lori, do you want to jump in with deadlines? I know our audience is really county focused, but for the city folks that might have chimed in about that process.
So for our county people, I just want to reiterate, all they need to do is sign the allocation letter and send it back to Cal OES. For our cities, their application deadline was just extended today to November 12th, 5 p.m. We have heard and understand that with PSPS going on and internet down, that it's extremely difficult for folks to submit an application by the November 4th deadline. So just to reiterate, we have extended that to November 12th, 5 p.m.
So let's see, next question is special district funding through the county? So there has, in this $75 million that was appropriated in the state budget, that was broken out, as Cara discussed, $37.5 million to the state, that the state will retain for their purposes, and $26 million to counties, and $10 million through a application process with cities, and then I think it was an additional $1.5 million set aside for tribes to access. There was no specific funding set aside or allocated for special districts, so that is not part of this kind of defined pot of money.
Our next question, if a tribe is not in a HFRA, can they still apply for tribal allocations? We don't have a lot of specifics on that, so I think that's one that we'll have to follow up with folks on, unless Lori, you have more information on the tribal allocation.
So the tribal allocation is for federally recognized tribes. There has been no differentiation made on whether or not they are an FRA, BIA, SRA, or any other designations.
Next question, on the check we received, what does the scheduled amount mean on the agency copy? Admittedly, trying to quickly review a sample letter, and we may have to get back to you on that. I don't want to give an accurate answer to that question, so we can look into that. I would presume that the scheduled amount is in reference to the dollar amount that is actually being allocated to the county referenced in the letter, but not seeing it quickly in the letter. So if you want to follow up with that question to us, we can get back to you.
Our next question, can nonprofits apply through their county manager for use of funds directly related to emergency preparedness work with nonprofit infrastructure? Again, these funds are directed specifically towards local government and the state. I would note that there was $50 million that went out earlier in the year directed specifically at community-based organizations for these types of events. So there's already been a significant allocation to those groups.
If a county OES has yet to receive the Cal OES allocation letter, who's the best point of contact to reach out to in regard to that? So I think it's clear in the question, but if you are already coordinating with your your designated county OES manager, and that department or department head is indicating that they have not received the letter, I hope you don't mind, Lori, if we recommend that they follow up with OES on the whereabouts of that letter.
Not at all. My contact information is, so you can contact me, Lori Nezhura, LORI.NEZHURA at caloes.ca.gov, and I will make sure that that information gets to the proper people. Actually, I may have really quickly here that email again, PSPS at caloes.ca.gov. That's really the best place to send your questions about this grant. PSPS at caloes.ca.gov.
Who needs to sign the allocation letter, the county administrator or city manager or someone else? Probably one we need to follow up on in the sample letter, just a signature of authorized agent. So probably on behalf of the county or the OES manager. Lori, do you have the answer on the kind of technical details, or?
While Lori's looking for that answer, we can move on to the next question. Somebody has received the check. That's good news, but there is no funding allocation attached. What do we need to sign to send back? So again, as Lori's looking for that answer about who actually signs the letter, they're two separate, both an email and a hard copy of the letter with the eligibility criteria that was sent out, and then separately a check is being delivered. So if you've received the check and not the letter, contact OES, let them know you're still looking for that letter. And Lori, do you have the information on who should sign that letter?
Yes, we sent the letters out to, it says signature of the authorized agent. So the person who received the letter is the authorized agent for the allocation, and that should be the same person that received the check.
Great. And just for peace of mind of the individual that has received the check but not the letter to sign, just note that the last version of the letter that we had said to sign and return the letter within 20 days. So there is, while we urge you to do that as soon as possible, a little bit of time to also sign and return the letter.
And if I may, that authorized agent is the executive director of the EMPG, the Emergency Management Performance Grant. So that's the person that we sent both the letter and the check to, the executive director of EMPG. That's the authorized agent.
Well, we are butting up on our time as folks have to hop off and join other calls. We just want to thank you for joining us today. And as a reminder, we did record this webinar, and we'll email a link of the recording to all of you that have joined us within a few days. And the slides will be available later this afternoon on the CSAC website in our webinar library. And this CSAC website is www.counties.org. Thank you so much.